Okay, hello everyone, how are you? Today I'm going to give you some guidelines on how to do the analysis using the tenets of principles and parameters theory and the theory on predicates and arguments so that we can get into the analysis of different practical cases. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is to state if the instance under analysis is a proof of the typology each language belongs to. That is to say, prodrop or non-prodrop, or if it is an exceptional case. Why do we say this? Because as Patricia mentioned, I don't remember if it was on one of her presentations or during the online class, all typologies leak. That is to say that there are some times when a language doesn't behave according to its typology for several reasons. So, for example, English, that is a non-prodrop language which requires the presence of a subject in initial position, may have some instances in which the subject can be omitted. Okay, Patricia mentioned this on her last presentation about information packaging in the clause, and she mentioned a few cases in which the subject pronoun in a sentence in English can be dropped, can be omitted. The same happens with Spanish. Spanish is a prodrop language, which means that in general subject pronouns or object pronouns are omitted. Well, but there might be some instances in which the subject is retained with different purposes and with different effects in discourse, right? So that's the first thing you need to establish when you see the sentences you have to analyze. In order to state that, concentrate on the following. And here we go. Subject or object pronoun retention or omission. Is the retention of a subject pronoun in Spanish? Well, if so, why has it been retained? And which is the effect achieved, if any, in that particular context? So we don't expect, in most cases, subject pronoun retention in Spanish. However, that may happen. And the same happens with English. Is there omission of a subject pronoun in English? If so, why is it possible? Why is it possible that you find an instance in which in a language whose typology is non-prodrop, that is to say that it requires a subject in initial position, why is it possible that in that case the subject pronoun could have been dropped or omitted? Okay? So, what's the idea of this? Well, do not concentrate only on what you expect to find in a language, in an example of each language, but also concentrate on the things that are not the ones you could expect, okay? Those that are less frequent. Then you should also pay attention to the presence of expletives. The existential there, the anticipatory it, the dummy it, okay? And when identifying the presence of an expletive, if you happen to encounter an expletive, you should ask these questions, ask yourself these questions. Is the expletive filling the subject slot because there is no other subject? Like in the case of it's raining, okay, there is no other subject. But you could also have an instance in which the expletive is filling in the subject slot because the notional subject or real subject has been moved to a non-canonical position, has been extraposed, has been postponed. So be careful with that, because sometimes you learn the speech by heart, okay? And when you write your analysis, you have a sentence with, for example, an existential there, and you say the expletive there has been used because in English there must be a subject in the sentence for a sentence to be grammatical. And that is not exactly the reason in that case, because the sentence already has a subject. The problem is that the subject has been moved from this initial position, this slot at the beginning of the sentence, and it has been moved to a place that is located post-verbally. Okay? So careful with that. And then if you find an instance of an it as an expletive, you should identify, for example, if the expletive it is a case of an anticipatory it, or if it is a case of a dummy it, because again, there's a difference. In the cases where you find a dummy it, the only subject in the sentence is the dummy it. But in the cases where you find an anticipatory it, the anticipatory it is a subject, yes, but there is a real subject that has been moved to another position in the sentence, okay? So, if you find an instance of an anticipatory it, you should be able to identify which the subject that has been extraposed is, okay? Whether it be a to infinitive clause, a gerundial clause, or a WH clause, for example, which in general are the types of subjects that are postponed following the end weight principle, okay, since they are long, heavy, and complex constituents. And then, for example, if you happen to find an instance of an existential there, you should be able to state if the existential there, the expletive, is part of a bare, an extended, or a presentational existential sentence. Remember that if you watched Patsy's video on information packaging in the clause, she explains the 3 different types of existential sentences that exist, okay? So all these things have to do with the syntactic analysis, this syntactic perspective, this theory on theory of principles and parameters, which is a syntactic theory. Then we move on to semantics, to the theory on predicates and arguments. So when you analyze the argument structure, you have to take into account a few things. Among them, you should, first of all, identify the predicator of a sentence. And when identifying the predicator of a sentence, you will be able to identify the arguments, because remember that I told you last class that in order to identify the predicator in the sentence, we should identify first the arguments. Once we rule them out, once we strip them away, we have our predicator, right? So you identify the arguments as well, and regarding the arguments, we should be able to state which the theta roles of each argument are, whether they are agents, patients, locatives, themes, okay? And also related to the arguments, since we know how many arguments are selected for by this predicator, that information will allow us to state the degree of the predicate. If it is a 0 place, 1 place, or monadic, or diadic, or triadic, right? And finally, your concluding remark has to do with the fact that you need to state if the sentences at stake, the examples at stake, are correspondent or non-correspondent. And in this analysis, in which we are taking into account two different perspectives, a syntactic one and a semantic one, you should be able to state if they are correspondent or non-correspondent in both senses. That is to say, regarding syntax, what do you see in the surface of the sentence? Do you see that they are similar, that they are different, that there are elements that appear in one language and not in the other? So, based on that, you should say if they are correspondent or not in terms of the setting of the parameter. So, chances are that if languages are behaving according to their typology, that is to say prodrop and non-prodrop, chances are that the instances will be non-correspondent because they belong to different typologies. But if one of the languages is behaving not according to its typology, and if it is an exceptional case for any reason, well, chances are that they are going to be correspondent, okay? And in terms of argument structure, in order to state if they are correspondent or not, you should take into account all these things that we have mentioned. If you have a similar predicator of the same type, for example, if they are verbal, non-verbal, if the predicator selects the same number of arguments, okay, and that of course leads us to the degree of the predicate, and if the arguments perform the same theta rows or not. So based on that, you can state if you think they are cases of correspondence or not, okay? So this is it as to the guidelines. I will upload another video in which I will show you how to do the analysis, okay? We will analyze two sentences, two pairs of sentences, and then I will give you a sample of a paragraph of how you should write your analysis of this topic. Okay, so thank you very much, and I see you in the next video. Bye.